appreciate you taking time today to be on this webinar. It actually ended up with a special guest, which I didn't know about until yesterday, so I'm really excited about that. But we have Dan Pierson of LegacyShield on the call today to talk about data privacy matters, but he also invited Michael Babikian to the call, so I appreciate both of you being here.
Happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cheryl.
Absolutely. So what I want to do is I want to show everybody a few things here of who we are, why we're on the call, etc. The first thing is, not that I'm important, but I am maybe a little bit in connecting people on the females in finance side of this call. My name is Cheryl Brown, and I am a huge advocate for women working in financial services and financial technology. I speak at about 25 to 40 conferences a year on social and digital marketing. So data protection, privacy is a very important topic to me. And I actually get asked more questions today about privacy than I actually do about Facebook or ROI even. And you know, I never thought I was going to see that day. Never thought I'd see the day that the word ROI, you know, the term wouldn't come up. But instead they're asking me much more questions about how protection of the data works and exchange of it, et cetera. And it's one of the main reasons why we're having this call today. And when I started the Females in Finance community, LegacyShield was a very front runner of a founding partnership with us. And so I was really grateful. Michael and I have been friends for a very long time. And I lovingly always say, I'll never forget the day you came in to a brokerage office where I used to work, and you had an appointment with somebody else, Michael, and then you also said, well, is Cheryl Brown here? I'll never forget, somebody said, why do you know these people? And I'm like, well, I just know them because we've run into each other for a long time. So I always tell everybody in financial services, be nice. They'll come back someplace else.
Well, Cheryl, you've always been a great connector, and I remember that day very well. I was meeting with a lot of the leadership of the organization and absolutely wanted to spend some time with you. So thank you again for doing that.
No, always. And I also want to be certain, too, that everybody on the call knows that both Michael and Dan are big proponents of the Females in Finance movement, of what we're doing here. And they are both male allies and are part of our Male Ally Network. And so I want you to feel comfortable reaching out, connecting with them, learning more, not just about what they do, but who they are as people, because they are very important to the movement of what we've created here too. So real quick, I want to walk through who's going to be on the call. If you don't know Dan Pierson, I was lucky enough to, I knew, you know, I'm going to be honest, I always come clean on things. I totally stalked you before I met you because I knew what you were doing in financial services before you even did LegacyShield, but then I got to meet you because of Michael, Dan. So I was really grateful for the connection that we made and what you've brought to the community. So I really, tell me real quick in a nutshell how you got into financial services and led to LegacyShield.
Yeah, first of all, I appreciate you saying such kind words about me. I can always use a stalker too, so that makes me feel good. I was in distribution for technology for quite some time, decided I wanted to move over to financial services. It happened right around 9/11, and the only people that were hiring were insurance companies because they don't need to pay you, it's commission only. So I started as an agent and then saw an opportunity with a distressed general agency that was almost at the brink of bankruptcy, going in there and turned that around, producing about $20 million in premium. Then left and started my own agency. And along that time frame, I became really good friends with Michael. We started our career together. He was in advanced marketing at Transamerica. I had started in the general agency world. And you know, we just kind of grew up together in that industry. And here I am today with Michael. We saw some challenges. Michael saw it from the carrier level. I saw it from a distributor level, and being on a couple boards with some carriers globally. It's not just a U.S. issue, it's a global issue. So that's why I decided to sell my agency and start LegacyShield.
Love that. And now Michael and I have gone back to days of trans and beyond. And so I would love, Michael, for people to hear your story as well, since you've just came on the call today. So I'm so happy about that you took time to spend with us, but how you got to where you are with this particular area of what you're doing in financial services.
Yeah, absolutely. My background has always been at the intersection of financial services and technology. I started out in electrical engineering and then moved over to financial services in a multifamily office, helping very wealthy families deal with estate planning and legacy planning. I was a tax attorney for a number of years before joining Transamerica. And going down that path, I met Dan very early on when I was at Transamerica in advanced marketing. And like Dan said, we grew up in the industry together. So it's been a great relationship for a couple decades. I moved around within Transamerica. I was very fortunate to spend over a dozen years there. I was in advanced marketing. I was the chief marketing officer for a while, chief product officer, and then I left as the CEO of Transamerica Brokerage. And Dan and I saw an incredible opportunity in the insurance space of making sure that an advisor was first and foremost in the relationship. We absolutely believe that this is still a sold category, whether it's legacy planning, estate planning, insurance, or just general financial services. People don't typically wake up and run out in the morning to do all of the things that we all get involved in. But we also knew that the future would involve some level of technology platform. And so we wanted to create a platform that was driven at a B2B level, not direct to consumer. And so everything we do is at an enterprise or organization or advisor basis. So it's absolutely our pleasure to be able to work with you, Cheryl. And I can also tell you this, just anecdotally and interestingly enough, we don't do a lot of measurement at a consumer level because we're not a direct-to-consumer organization, but we do with advisors and enterprises, and the majority of our advisors that are on our platform are female. That tells you a lot about adoption and kind of forward-looking and who's moving forward. So it's been really interesting for us to note that, and a lot of it is the kind of organizations that we work with, but it is an insight into the future as well.
Yeah, and I appreciate you mentioning that, because one of the things that, at least for me, that I have been I've been following for years, sort of the trend. I always think it's interesting when people say, oh, the women's market. I'm like, yeah, we can't be a market when we make all of mankind out there. I mean, that's not a market. And so to that point, though, I did feel as if we needed a community where we could invite everyone from financial services. We each bring something very unique and special and specific, but they also commingle very well. And you were so kind when I first came up with this idea. If you think back how many months, a year and a half ago that was, I thought, I'm going to do this. And it sounded so nuts at the time. And here I am, and it's working. Still nuts. But nevertheless, it's there. So the point of talking today, and you are each experts in areas of this idea of data protection and data in general, and how it's handled and manipulated, how people are accessing, et cetera. And so one of the things that I want to state right off of right out the door, because I deal with this a lot with what I do in social and digital marketing, and that is that there's 3 truths that I share with people that I stand behind as of today in August of 2019. That there was one, that there is no federal, salvation at sight right now. That, we're seeing a little bit from other areas when they came out, and we only heard about it here in America, about the GDPR. And it was just this way of providing this idea of a unified set of standards or rules, and everybody kind of freaked out, especially if you have an international company, because you had to update your website and how information was handled, et cetera. And I believe that we need to have something more around our data. I think it is imperative. And I don't know, do you have any points you want to add to that? But I believe that we are very woefully behind in addressing this as a country.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I would agree that we are behind in addressing it. And I think one of the bigger issues is that consumers don't understand it. In the world of free, you're giving up something for it. And a lot of people do not understand that free isn't necessarily free. You're giving up either your privacy, you're giving up other information. And the biggest issue is not just giving it up, but you don't know what's being done with it. So it's the unknown regarding what happens with the data you're putting into different apps or different software, whatever that may be.
Yeah, and it's funny, I remember back in the day, not that long ago, we talked about big data, it's all data. It's not, there's not big data, little data, it's just data. And you're right, we don't know what we're giving up a lot of times. We click through, they make things so, we're so about immediate gratification that we click through privacy notices, we click through things to get to what we want because we got to be on the move. But I agree that we really have no idea of what's going on out there. And that leads me to number 2, which is there's just a lot of risk for the people who are unprepared. I think that that's another truth that's out there that I address when I'm on stage and talking to people, that when given, the ability to lodge a complaint, consumers are oftentimes very quick to jump at that chance. They get on Twitter, they complain, they do all of this. But I think that we have to embed best practices in organizational workflows and automatically archive those workflows for regulatory and even judicial scrutiny if that comes about too. Because when I hear in the registered rep world of things, we have a lot of things in place that we're trying to capture conversations and archive and retain and do all of that. But when you're in an unregulated environment, such as an independent insurance advisor might be, I do believe that there is a fair amount of regulation that still needs to be instilled in them, in this idea of handling data, whatever that might look like, because without it, it really does leave a rogue behavior to happen. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. And Cheryl, I'll also, just stepping back for a second, when you really look at regulatory framework, and some of the stuff that you talked about as far as even consumers getting into complaining about things or lodging complaints, the regulatory framework that we have within the United States and even worldwide, I know GDPR is out there, but even worldwide, is fairly weak. Yes. And one of the reasons why Dan and I structured LegacyShield, even when we started this almost 5 years ago, in a particular way, we didn't set it up as B2C because from a B2B perspective, we have Fortune 500 companies looking over our shoulders, and that is a much better standard because the regulatory framework is just not there. And Dan's absolutely right. Most people have data that is just strewn all over the web and apps. The average person has 90 different credentialed accounts where they've accepted terms about their data and data privacy without being able to read those and fully understand them. And I think we're all, look, I'm an attorney by background. I'm guilty of it too. I don't sit there and read 20 pages of terms of use to be able to use a particular app. So it's very difficult from that perspective as a consumer to be able to understand what happens with all of our data and cybersecurity. So I think a better standard out there is our organizations that are holding themselves out to higher standards around what happens with data. Now, from a regulatory perspective, I'll just step back and say this really quickly. Massachusetts and California are kind of leading the charge in the United States. In fact, in the state of California, we now have a law that's going into effect on January 1 of 2020 that is the most sweeping set of laws around privacy and data. It is the California Consumer Privacy Act that will be going into effect on January 1, 2020. And it is GDPR-esque in the sense that it gives consumers, California residents specifically, but I do think it will have a lot of impact in other states as well. It will give residents the ability to know what personal information is being collected, access to that information, the ability to take it off the service, and services that are participating within the state have to provide GDPR-like protections under this new law. Now, I'm going over broad brushes, but to suffice it to say that the regulatory framework will mature, but it's going to take a lot of time. And we saw some of the disconnect and how difficult this is, even with the Facebook hearings just recently, with our legislators.
Yeah. And that actually is what tipped off a lot of people asking me questions at events because of that Facebook and the scrutiny that came behind it. And it's funny because everything you said sort of led me into my third hard truth that I talk about, which is compliance impacts competitiveness. And the idea behind this is that consumers value transparency. The brand and the company that puts their privacy on a pedestal earns loyalty. So when I know the caliber of the privacy and the parameters and the wrappers of what that looks like, that is when I value that organization more. And that's been proven time and again that when you do that, you're going to earn that person's trust because they weren't so transparent until, a lot of organizations that take your collateral weren't very transparent until Facebook kind of came up and went, oops, and now it's the ones who've done that. And there are many like yours who were doing it prior to Facebook having a problem.
Cheryl, I couldn't agree more. Michael and I couldn't agree more. We were just talking about this the other day. If you look at Apple, they have a cult following. And if you are familiar with CES, it's a big electronic show, consumer electronic show in Vegas. And you had Amazon there, you had Google there, and you had Apple there. And one of the billboards, I believe it said, what happens on your iPhone stays in your iPhone. And so they're really putting privacy up front and center, very transparent about how they conduct their business. And we as an organization, we're betting on that. That's how we operate. We're very transparent as far as what information is retained and what isn't, how they can handle their information, and how the information is shared. And, we don't sell that information. We don't share that with other parties. We put the controls in the consumer's hand. The consumer decides who to share that information with. And we believe that's the gold standard as far as giving the consumer the choice as far as who has access to that information and when they have access to that information.
Yeah, and that's a good segue into what we're going to talk about today, because three things in financial services that we deal with on the daily, and especially as we look at, exchanging client data or the client exchanging data, digital assets, because they're plentiful. They're not just specific to financial service assets and everything else. I want to go over three things in particular, which are protection, control, and access. And ultimately, how we're having a solution in place actually creates more, business in the bottom line, because that is indeed where the data mining and things can be uncovered. And so the first one I want to talk about is let's talk about data protection. I read an article just within the last 24 hours or so that basically said the data privacy must be the priority, even in the absence of regulation. So we're going back to that unregulated space, that if you're not even in a regulated space, this absolutely has to be a priority. And in financial services, we oftentimes think that this falls into the realm of compliance, right? It's for those who are not regulated by compliance, though, that the umbrella can be quite rogue, as I, also alluded to before. Enterprises generate and store increasing amounts of data, and ensure the privacy and security of that data is more important than ever before. I would love for you to, either one of you, Dan or Michael, talk about what that means, because data protection today is only going to become more and more and more important as more and more data is being exchanged online versus, in tangible format, if you will.
So what's interesting about data protection is we fundamentally believe there are two types of organizations out there, Cheryl. We believe there are organizations that know they've been hacked and organizations that don't know they've been hacked. Mm-hmm. Period. And most organizations fall into that latter bucket, unfortunately. There are very few startups, there are very few organizations that start out and really have a significant line item from a budgetary perspective of what they're doing around data protection. That should not be the case today, but it typically is. We see it quite a bit. We participate in a lot of the fintech and SureTech communities.
Yep.
From a startup perspective, what's going on in Silicon Valley, Silicon Beach in Southern California, and other communities as well. And a lot of it is in that space, unfortunately. Now, as organizational maturity models develop and organizations grow up, if you will, that typically ends up changing over time. But that's not always the case out of the gates. And unfortunately, the layers of protection that should be there are not necessarily there. One of the things that we did from the beginning, and hate to keep going back to our example, but it's just an example, is we ended up spending a lot of money just knowing that our primary customer was going to be a Fortune 500 company, an advisor, people that were going to ask all sorts of questions because they had a lot to lose. Unlike a startup that might not have as much to lose, they haven't been around for a long time, we spent millions of dollars on data privacy, data protection, and the layers of protection that get added. And it's really about creating the layers of protection, because just because you have an attack doesn't mean that anything has been compromised or taken. And if you have the proper layers of protection around that, then you can protect consumer data ultimately.
Yeah, and Michael, I agree with 100%. Aside from just the infrastructure we put in place, is also the people. As a startup, usually revenue is the most important thing to focus on. One of the first people we brought on to our team was an individual who spent his entire career with the military on security and privacy. And so we brought that individual in to lay the groundwork, both from a technology architecture standpoint, as well as internal control and process standpoint, to make sure we minimize any risk that's possible.
Yeah, and I think that that's great. I love the fact that Michael said there should be a specific budget line for data protection, and that should be a standard, because in today's world, it's right. It's not if there's a data breach, it's when. And that's
right.
It's becoming the normal. Like every day we hear data breach. We're not even phased. Like the first time it's like, oh, and now it's like you literally hear data breach and you just skim right over. It's like, yeah, there goes my data again. It's become so commonplace.
And what's really disturbing are the ones that we hear about, and typically this is becoming a little more of the norm. We hear about the ones from a whistleblower or forced or after the fact. And if you really look at the big ones that we've heard, go back to see where the breach occurred. It's years ago. And unfortunately, that just can't be the way that organizations operate with our most sensitive data. And so those are the things that we just all, as financial professionals, need to be aware of and protect all of our respective and collective clients.
Right. And, when you think about it, so when people see that I was, do social and digital marketing, what they don't know is the 29-year history I've had. I was an underwriter. I was a life insurance underwriter for 12 years.
Yep.
And I am telling you right now, when you're in that kind of space, I'm asking a consumer to share either directly with me, which was always 100% okay. But oftentimes they wanted to go back through their financial service professional because that's where it started, right? That's where the point of trust was. And so you're asking them to handle their medical records, their social security numbers, their W-2s, a lot of financial information, profit loss, business, etc. And that information needed to flow in a way that protected that consumer always, not about what was the quickest, but what was always the safest. And, there was a lot of pushback. And I think Michael and Dan, both of you have been around this isn't your first rodeo, that there were a lot of people who were like, encrypted emails. What? I'm not doing all of that. Now today, I think that what I would love for you to do while we're talking about this idea of data protection is walk us through a little bit on LegacyShield, how you take information, what you're using it, how it's, because you did SMART, you went B to B to C. So you went straight to the consumer and worked it backwards as you built this particular product.
Yeah, and Cheryl, look, we had very similar history. I had the agency, and one of the things I was really skilled at was underwriting. And in working with the brokers, unfortunately, aside from just making sure the general agency has everything locked down and very controlled as far as the information, unfortunately, even if that happens, a lot of the advisors would just keep the policy in the trunk of the car or, have it all over the place. And so going back to your comment, one of the things that we have built in is the ability to have policies delivered directly from the carrier through the distributor to the client, because that also enhances security. As far as the architecture of our system, what we've done is row and cell level encryption, meaning everything is encrypted. And I'll draw an analogy. And this is the architecture that our chief security officer put in place. If you walk into an office building and there's 20 offices in there, and you only lock the front door and someone breaks in, it's easy to get all the information within every office.
Yeah.
What we've done is we've architected it so that every office door is locked and the keys are hidden with one person.
Not under the rug.
That's right. That's right. And in fact, you actually need 2 keys to open it. So it's almost like going to the bank with the safety deposit box, where you need the banker to put his key in and the client to put their key in. Going back as far as how we handle the information, we look at it as a client's information. We don't sell it. The carrier doesn't have access to it. No one can view it or have access unless that consumer opens up the door for that individual to view it. It's their data. They can ask for it to be erased using military erasing standards. They can ask for it to be purged and sent back to them. They could keep it on our system. And one of the things that we do is we have lifetime storage. So they could just keep it on our storage for life, or they could share it with somebody at any time.
Yeah, and that's where it kind of leads to the next point of this, because let's talk about the data control. There's a lot of data out there that is very uncontrolled and just willy-nilly. And I was looking up some numbers, and the ones that I trust the most, even I love when they go back, like Michael suggested, like, where did the breach happen? A lot of times it was years and years before, and we're just finding out about it, right? Major credit card companies that shall remain nameless on this, they knew. They knew. Don't sit there and tell me, oh, guess what? Yeah, because when they went back. But the risk is really for the smaller enterprises. So this is where I become really protective in conversation, because most financial service professionals are running these smaller enterprises. They aren't big, large. They might have a big, large name, but they're really running a book of business that's specific to them, or a company that might have 10 or 15 employees and still, although nice sized, still a smaller enterprise. It said that 62% of breaches in 2013, so this was not, this is 6 years ago. It's 62% then. It's so much more today. But at a small business level, because they don't have a cybersecurity plan for documents and exchanges, which goes back to Michael's point about specific budget lines for data protection, which should be a standard, and having a cybersecurity plan for documents and exchanges, which goes back to the control. Technology is going to become more sophisticated as time passes, and it's always a smart idea to prevent yourself and your business from misuse of client personal and business data. I remember I worked at an insurance company on the West Coast that Michael lives very close to, and they used to have scouters that would walk around the office just to see if you were sitting at your desk when that computer was open. That's how important they took security. It was very important. That was what their job was, to walk around all day and make sure that if you weren't at your desk, that computer was definitely logged off. And if you didn't, they had like almost a zero tolerance. Like it wasn't a 1, 2, 3 strike. It was a 1 and then you were out. So you have to have, and you go through, and you have to go back through a class. I mean, they took it pretty legit. I mean, there's other places I've been to, because I actually worked in an OSJ office, and they would walk around like everybody's computer would be open. You're like, oh, you're scratching their head like, oh my gosh. So there's a lot of training that has to come with that. But I'd love for you to talk about data control. What are your thoughts on this when you hear these numbers and technology today?
Yeah, what's interesting about that, and even with those percentages, and I do think that it's a lot higher today. One of the macro trends that's happening around the type of attacks that are out there, they're becoming much more sophisticated. It's no longer the 15-year-old kid sitting in their house hacking into a system. That's not what's happening. It's becoming much more sophisticated. It's becoming more of the larger organized crime, NGOs, things of that kind of organizational structure that is obtaining this type of data. So that's one thing, and that becomes very expensive for smaller organizations. In fact, I think it's never been easier to start a company or an organization today, but it's never been more difficult to scale it and deal with the complication and expense structure that is hidden of data privacy, data security, and the like. So that's one thing. With all that being said, going back to what you were mentioning specifically, Cheryl, one of the greatest and easiest points of entry into any system is the human touch point. And so it's as easy as someone not being at their terminal or their computer not being encrypted and having some level of open architecture into a platform. We've actually done a lot of things around that using virtual machines that everyone signs into, not allowing anyone to have anything on their particular computer. So everything's locked down from that perspective. It's a lot of operational structure to do that and to maintain that, especially with distributed organizations, which is much more of the norm today. Employees all over the place. And again, it's so easy to click on a link somewhere from an email that comes in that looks absolutely official. And it's that human point of entry that you're talking about, Cheryl, that makes it very difficult to keep up with all that. There are ways to do it. It's just the organization needs to be committed to making privacy and data security and consumer data the forefront of their organization.
Yeah. And I have to tell you, would think in 2019 that people would not be clicking on those links, and yet they are, because it's immediate gratification. They can easily do it. It's all about user friendliness, and people who do the hacking, as you suggested, or the ones who are much more sophisticated in their way of doing this type of, criminal activity, because that's really what it is. I want to state the obvious. They know that we're going to take the path of least resistance, which is to click.
Yep. Yeah, and Cheryl, it's also everything Michael said. It's you have to do all of it. You just can't pick one and say I'm secure. It's a matter of making sure that where you store your data is secure. It's making sure how you use the data is secure. Making sure you have a process in place for the employees, like you had mentioned, locking down the computers. That's a lot of people miss that step. So it's a matter of looking at every facet of your business and making sure that you're putting security first. And it starts with a good plan. If you don't have a good playbook for it, you're not going to be able to execute on it.
Yeah. No, I think that that's very true. It leads us to talk about data access, right? Because while there needs to be this idea of harmony and the idea of sharing the information while protecting it as it's moving through the world, I found it interesting that the Federal Trade Commission says right on their website, there are 4 main ways to do this. Know who you share information with. So this is something that you guys have all addressed these issues. Know who you share your information with. Store and dispose of your personal information securely, especially your social security number. Ask questions before deciding to share your personal information, and maintain appropriate security on your computers and other electronic devices. And I feel that it's imperative that people understand that very few technology that I see today, and I get access to a lot of it, actually addresses all 4 of those main concerns, whereas that is something you guys took into account when you built your product.
Yeah, absolutely. And, the Social Security number was never meant to be as an identification number in technology or other areas. I go back, 20 plus years ago when I was in college, and the Social Security number is printed right on your ID card for everyone to see. We take that stuff seriously. We don't even ask for it. There's no need to ask for a Social Security number. It's not asked within our system. So you absolutely need to be very careful with that. And then, asking the right questions. We make sure that we provide the individuals with all the information they need up front before they enter any data so that they have the proper information.
Yeah. And that's just it, is I think that when people, when people think about this idea of data access, right, it goes back, I always go back to underwriting days, because that was the easiest for me I was amazed at how many, I'll put it this way. I was amazed at how many celebrities that I did life insurance on that had no problem emailing their medical records. Like, they would just show up and I was like, oh, what are you doing? Don't you ever do that again. They just, and of course it's got their Social Security number, all of the things that we have to put on lockdown. And I think the other thing too is this idea of, so we give our information away, especially think about when we love people and care about them, and we want to make sure that if something happens to us, they have access to things. But what happens when the love goes sour and people get divorced and they have someone, how do this is where having a program like yours, being able to pull that back and saying, whoops, not anymore. I don't want you to, I'm keeping it real. It is 2019.
So it's funny. That's one of the primary premises of our business, is that we know life changes, and we know many people want to keep things secure. So if you look at most of the technology out there, as far as repositories and being able to store information, it's either you share the information now with somebody or you never share it. And in that instance, you talk about ex-spouses. You may not want to share that information now. And with our system, what we do is we allow somebody to store all their information in the military-grade vault. We're able to then have that individual tag who should receive it and release that information to somebody only at the time when that person should receive it, such as death or disability. But if that person so chooses to share that information right now, they can, and then revoke that sharing privileges at any time.
Yeah. And I've even seen it in instances where, a good example for me, I've had a CPA for years and years and years, and they made an error on my filing a year and a half ago. So it would have been filed in 2018, my 2017 taxes. And it cost me, it was a lot, and it was a big hassle, and I had to fix it. I no longer engaged that particular CPA because it was a sizable issue, and to pull everything back that I had given them access to be honest, was kind of a pain. I'm not gonna lie. It was painful, and it was I was kind about the way that we went about doing it. I think anybody who knows me on this call knows I'm not really a mean person. It takes a lot to tarnish my sparkle, but just trying to undo, unravel what was, tied together. That makes it very difficult. So the ease of being able just to revoke something is really powerful. Would you agree with that?
Couldn't agree more.
Well, and especially with the pace of life and the speed of life today, you just don't know what the future holds. It's really important to do that. And it's not, like you mentioned, it's not always personal relationships, it's the professional relationships. I mean, think about every insurance agent out there that goes out and sits down with a client, and one of the questions that you ask is what is pre-existing as far as insurance is concerned? What kind of insurance do you have in place? And what's often the answer? I'm not quite sure what I have and don't have. I mean, it's such a mystery, and just imagine what that's like from a CSI perspective for family members to figure that out when they're no longer there, let alone an agent when they're there. It's just very difficult to put all that together, number one, and then be able to share it and retract it when you want to.
Yeah, and that's the idea, is the when you want to. I think too, one of the things I think is interesting about the LegacyShield product is that when I think about families today and the due diligence of the kids to have access to parents. So my dad's 80. And he's a little not all together. His faculties are not 100% anymore. He ambulates well and he gets around and he does things, but the upstairs is a little cloudy these days. And so because of that, I've been working very hard at trying to get him, when he is focused, because he has moments where he's really, really focused, I can say, Dad, I need you to show me today where this is. And then he'll look at me, you're right, I need to do that. So I'm getting, man, if I'd had something where I'd had been able to do this 10 years ago when he was really all together there, it just would have been so much easier because it's the typical thing, right? I'm the responsible one. I'm the main caregiver. I'm the one who's going to be the one. Every time there's a problem, I get called, even though I live 40 miles away and my stepbrother lives 5 minutes from them. It's me. I got to travel back. So having access to that stuff it empowers me to be able to help him in the moment. You know what I mean?
It absolutely does. And just think about how much has changed in the last few years and what that acceleration is going to look like in the next few years, in the next decade, in the next couple decades for all of us.
Yeah.
And so absolutely that's the case. And you've got that sandwich generation thing going on that a lot of people have to be able to, how do I deal with that? How do I deal with all the stuff that I want to be able to get to my kids? And what's also changing, Cheryl, is the type of data that we have. So a generation ago, we used to print everything and we had it, and I know our industry oftentimes prints things still, but it was hard to share, but also very hard to lose. And today, as everything is digital, think of how easy it is to share. It's wonderful, but how easy it is to lose as well. And with the average person having 90 credentialed accounts where all of your information is distributed and dispersed all over the place, it's difficult enough to understand where all of your data is while you can calmly sit down and figure it out, let alone when life changes.
Yeah. And I know a lot of the conversation here has been around, let's say, insurance and stuff, but the software actually does a lot more than just insurance documentation. So I want to make sure the people knew that.
Yeah, absolutely. It really is a dashboard and really a digital platform for living in the digital age. So it really is a mechanism for you to be able to, for the average person to be able to live in the digital age. Dan and I are very interested in cracks in thought. And what we mean by that is that oftentimes we live with certain philosophies and understanding of the world, and yet the world has changed, even though we understand it has changed. So we all get that we're living in the digital age today. We all understand that. We all get that. And we take advantage of that all over the place. We have Shutterfly accounts and things of that nature. But yet we don't plan as if it has. So we still do things like estate planning in a very traditional way. Well, where does the documentation of all your digital assets, the most important memories, family recipes, things like all of your photos and the accounts around your photos? And I don't mean the actual photo, but the Shutterfly account. Because you might not want to move all your photos out of Shutterfly. It's a really valuable service and others like it, but Google Photos and the like. But how do you make sure that people have access to it? Not necessarily today, but down the road when you want them to have access to it. How do you do that in today's world? And so those are the things that even as advisors, we just don't necessarily put into place for our clients, and consumers don't think through that aspect of it. And that's what we mean by those cracks in thought of living in the digital age. And that's what our platform allows you to do. It allows you to live in the digital age.
I love that. So I want to make sure everybody knows if you want to ask questions, you can, because I'll just do a love fest here with Dan and Mike all by myself, because I know that what they're doing right now really answers a lot of the needs that you have in the financial services area, especially around security of data and access to it, et cetera. So I want you to feel free that you can ask questions, but I also wanted to have Dan, Michael, you guys are, like I said, you're welcome to share your screen if you ever want to show anything live, but I would love for you to talk about what the LegacyShield offer is, your partnership with us. Just make sure that people, I'm always very transparent with everyone because you are on my website, as I showed at the beginning of this, and everybody in our community, we're about to cross 2,100 members. I don't know if you knew that, but the last time we talked, I think I was like at 1,700. But everybody has access to, this product through their Females in Finance membership. So I'll let you talk.
Yeah, thank you. Our service is completely configurable, and in our relationship, I know you wanted to provide the most robust service to everybody. So you have, or your constituents get everything that we have to offer, which includes My Legacy. And My Legacy is the vault we were talking about. It's a lifetime vault. It is the ability to store and retain all your social media accounts and passwords and financial information. We have something called Financial View, which allows you to consolidate all your financials into one platform. So if you have different credit cards and different bank accounts and cash value life insurance, you can see that all in one view. And then we also have something that we think is very helpful because it goes hand in hand with the legacy planning, is a complete basic estate planning kit. So the offering comes with a basic will, financial and medical powers of attorney, advanced directive and HIPAA authorization, and then some calculators that the individual can use or the advisor can use to calculate retirement needs, some financial planning needs, life expectancy. All that is what is available to the consumer. And the advisor gets an advisor portal where they could not only run traditional calculators and share files with their clients, but they also are able to receive prospects from them. And the reason why they're able to receive prospects is that anybody they send out or provide LegacyShield to, as those individuals add their family members to receive information in the future, those individuals receive a complimentary subscription too, and they come back as prospects to the advisor. So in short, what we're offering for your constituents is a discounted price. Typically we would charge, and it's a very, very modest price to begin with, but they get a 20% discount. So it's $800 for the year. They are able to add up to 500 clients to LegacyShield, and each one of those 500 clients would receive everything I mentioned, which is My Legacy to store all their information, Financial View to view all their financials, the calculators, and the basic estate plan.
Wow. And so the actual documentation that you have in that for the basic will and the health directives and stuff, when those are drawn up, do we do the filing? They do the filing?
Yeah, great question. It's a unique system. It's AI driven with about 70 attorneys as part of the LegacyShield professional network to support the individual. They're county and state specific. They would complete the document, and then depending upon the state and the document would require either a notary or just a witness. And then they would print out the signature pages. There's a barcode on it, so they don't need to print out the entire document. Get just the 1 or 2 pages signed, scan them back to LegacyShield where it compiles the complete document together and automatically sends it into the vault. The only thing that actually needs to be filed is a living trust. So the individual does have the ability to upgrade to a living trust if that's something that is needed, and that would be filed at the county clerk's office.
Got it. And what about changes? So if somebody has an amendment, they no longer are in love with the person that's on that stuff. I'm trying to make those polite because I'm better, not bitter anymore. I'm better. So when I have to make fun of it, because if not, it was a very expensive lesson in life, but about amendments and changes of beneficiaries and things.
Yeah, so our system has the ability to revoke or restate or amend the documents. It is AI driven, so as you go through it, it's going to flag different issues as well as identify whether something needs to be restated, amended, or revoked.
Yeah, and then specific to that, so let's go back to the bottom line, to the financial service professional, because I always think about what's in it for my financial service people in the membership. So when somebody comes in and they have this, besides having access to a real ability to do the funding vehicles, if you will, especially on the insurance and on the investment side too, but the insurance side of it, a lot of times we get in there to sit down at the table and have a conversation, and we're like, oh, you don't have a will. Okay, hold on, let's put the cart before the, let's stop for a second, because they need to get basic documentation in place, and that allows them to do that. You're actually providing them with a data mining lead generation opportunity through this too, because as they make changes, there are things that come with those changes in life and transitions as well. Would you agree?
Oh, yes, 100%. In fact, what we found in the advisors who are using it, aside from the prospecting tool that I mentioned before, talking about the will or the estate planning aspect and being able to provide that to an individual at no cost is really a low barrier of entry. It diffuses any kind of tension. And we've seen advisors open up, $70,000, $100,000 life insurance sales because it provides insight into exposure that the consumer has. And you're absolutely right, even on the regular evaluation as far as does something need to be amended, restated, or revoked, what else, what other kind of life changes occurred that would result in additional products, additional services, or solutions to complement the changes.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that that's really important, because then all of a sudden, this isn't just a value add in that you're providing a service to them, but it's also a bottom line, income generator for you as a professional as well. So I think that that's cool. I ask lots of questions. We didn't have any questions in the thing, but I knew what I was, as you were talking, I was like, well, what about this? And what about that? Did I miss anything important that I should have asked that you wanted to make sure that gets in this message today when we talk?
Cheryl, I don't think you necessarily missed anything. What's interesting about this is that just macro statistics and implications around the estate planning aspect. Over 71% of Americans don't have a basic estate plan. And I even hate the word estate plan or words estate plan, in the sense that it has an implication of wealth, it has an implication of grandeur, and a lot of people look at it and say, I don't have enough of an estate, I don't have assets, and that's the last thing we should be thinking about. These are just basic documents that we should have in place for even our adult children that we want to make medical decisions around when they go off to college and the like. So that's why we put them there. The number one reason, there's been a lot of surveys around why people don't have estate planning documents in place. And it's not the most pleasant thing to wake up and think about, but what's the number one reason that people give? And it's typically, I don't feel like I have access. And they don't mean that I can't find it if I'm looking for it. It's not at my fingertips.
Yeah.
And what we've tried to do around LegacyShield is to bring a lot of the services at a consumer-centric level through an advisor, the way services are brought to us in the digital age. They come to us on our time frame. Certainly, if you have an attorney or have a regular attorney that you visit, or the advisor has an attorney they work with, they can get onto our platform. They can even see the basic documents. They can upload their own documents. We allow that to happen as well. But if you don't, as an advisor or as a client, you want to be able to create those basic documents, because we don't think anybody should fall prey to that statistic of 71%. We allow people to create these on their own time. Our lives are no longer subject to, I can show up between the hours of 9 to 5 in a professional's office oftentimes. And so we've created the platform to be able to provide the information at a client's fingertips and then have an advisor there more as a coach to get into deeper conversations. And so that's one thing that we continue to keep pushing the envelope in what we develop, and we don't have the hubris to think we have it figured out. All of this has been developed with a lot of people giving us thoughts as to where we should go, and we continue to look for that.
Wonderful. Well, I appreciate this so much. And, real quick too, do you guys have an app now?
Very interesting about that. We did have an app. We pulled it because we started out with all of the functionality and realized that's not what we want to do. Dan and our R&D team are in the midst of releasing an app, and I think, Dan, you're releasing one with the team, like Monday from a test perspective or something?
Yeah, we're going to be internal beta testing on Monday. We're looking to release something by the end of the year, if not sooner.
Yeah.
And so real quick too, while a lot of people today have iPhones. We talked about that, the Apple people, but I do believe that what you can do is, at least this is what I do. I tell people I don't know if I need an app. I oftentimes just go to the website and then I just add it to my home screen. So it creates an icon so I can go there and use that too. So this is something for me that keeps me app-less, a little more app-free, but it gives me instant ability to click it. Or you can add it to your home screen too on your, one of your bookmark it and things like that too. I think is great. So with that, I want to sort of wrap because we're right at the hour and I want to respect everyone's time. We will we've recorded this. It will be added to the YouTube channel for playback. And then again, I want to thank Dan. I want to thank Michael for being on the call today and creating something so powerful and useful for financial service professionals. And then we have added this to our website at Females in Finance so that you can access it yourselves and click through. And with that, please know I appreciate your time tonight, guys. This has been great.
Thank you very much. And it's good to see what you're doing and with building that community, and keep up the good work. I really appreciate being invited on this call.
Yeah, thank you very much, Cheryl. We're very honored and have a lot of gratitude in being able to participate. Thank you for all the work you're doing. I echo Dan's comments.
Well, I appreciate you guys. Thanks so much. And to everybody on the call, thanks for your time as well. Take care.
Bye-bye.